chapter theme is re-examining freedom of expression, ethics, and threats to the safety of journalists.
With immense contribution to communication and media scholarship, having risen through the ranks as a senior lecturer in 2014 and an associate professor in 2019. He holds a bachelor's degree in English and a Master of Philosophy also in English, both Africa. Having critically examined the political communication of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, his research traces the rhetorical dynamics within Ghana's democratic culture, particularly presidential communication, and the different spaces and situations within which they are created and performed. Policy framework and formulation, as well as union leadership in the higher education landscape in Ghana. He has clear understanding of Ghana's higher education policy framework, especially on the new tertiary education policy framework, having contributed significantly in critical discussions on the public universities bill. He has participated in numerous workshops on higher education policy development at both national and international levels, reaching as far as the International Labour Organization Conference in Geneva and Education International Conference in Bangkok. He served as the local UTAG Vice President and President, respectively, at the University of Cape Coast, and rose to be the National President of UTAG. Administratively, ladies and gentlemen, our chairman, has shown his prowess with pride. He has served on several boards within and outside of the University of Cape Coast, including serving on the Council, Academic Board, College Board, Faculty Board, and also of the Ghana Institute of Journalism, having been appointed in 2020, but assuming office on 1st August 2020. I do not want to bore you so much with talks, because if I continue, we'll stay here for hours. So today, it will be so much about English, rhetoric, policy, and management, spiced with the trajectories of press freedom and safety of journalists. To have this man of many parts steering our public lecture today. With a warm and resounding clap from you, our audience, I would like to invite to the podium
Thank you. Dr. Wajida, thank you for your kind words. It was quite long. Didn't expect that. Good morning. Sure. Of the Ghana Institute of Journalism, senior management members, deans, heads of department, associates and partners of the Institute, reps from civil society groups, student leaders, wonderful distinguished invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, Jowolo campus, one of our two active campuses, and also to welcome you to an occasion which is aimed at contributing an important discourse on free speech, ethics, and threats to the safety of journalists. I especially welcome our distinguished speakers, Lawyer Nana Kweku Kumi from Shraj, and the illustrious journalist teacher, Dr. Ebu Afo, who have all agreed to share their expert knowledge with us at this forum. Initially, we are aware that we're supposed to have COP to be here. Shraj had already been invited, so they kindly decided to rep and speak on this subject. I am particularly encouraged by the presence of you. Media houses, journalists, communication practitioners, faculty members, old students, partners of the institute, students, and our many distinguished guests. I thank you for honoring our invitation, and I say Akwaba to you all. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is trite knowledge that Ghana's constitutional democracy is anchored on a number of key principles, enabling the operation of a liberal, divergent, uncensored media. This clearly finds expression severally in the 1992 Constitution. Indeed, by dedicating a whole chapter, chapter 12 of our Constitution, to enshrining the freedom and independence of the media, the framers of our Constitution saw the overwhelming need of a free and vibrant media as a critical instrument to growing and deepening our democracy. These provisions obviously took note of our checkered history, especially in those military interregnums where the political legal regime operated against free speech and media freedom. But even well into our Fourth Republican constitutional regime, as late as up until 2001, remnants of the shackles of media censorship and suppression remained through the operation of the criminal libel and seditious law, which was codified into our criminal code, Act 29. The repeal of the criminal libel law in 2001 by the passing of the Repeal of Criminal Libel and Seditious Law Amendment Act, Act 602, was therefore a sunshine moment in space. 2 decades after the repeal of this obnoxious law, while we can admit that Ghana's media has been better off without its obstacles, recent events have called into question whether the state is not quietly reoperationalizing a law that we have moved away from. The arrest of journalists and citizens, even sometimes in a Gestapo fashion, for alleged violation of one offense or the other relative to the exercise of their right to free speech, have raised concerns about the democratic republic such as ours. Section 208 and sometimes 207 of the Criminal and Other Offences Act at 29, coupled with other provisions in supporting legislation such as the Electronic Communication Act, Act 775, have oftentimes been cited as the basis for these interventions. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm sure our panelists with law backgrounds will touch on these areas. But even within among legal academics, there's a raging debate as to whether these can be the basis for the state's encroachment into free speech and whether these actions are consistent with our constitutional aspirations. There have been legitimate concerns about the intervening factors to media operations in Ghana and how that is contributing to the ethical deficiencies within the practice of journalism. The training of journalists, ownership of media, the role of the National Media Commission, the role of the Ghana Journalists Association and interest groups, enforcement of media standards are all key concerns which shape the media space. The laws, as much as the practice of journalism itself, in the wake of a sprawling media ecosystem accelerated by new media. Political interest and the use of the mass media to achieving same continues to also pose a challenge. Incendiary language, fake news, comments which are not healthy for public peace and order, and even sometimes hate speech continues to be a feature of our media space, raising genuine questions about the training of journalists, media ownership, role of the Ghana Journalists Association, and many other players. Safety of journalists is still a major issue. What is clear from all of these is that as stakeholders of free speech and public order, the media and allied institutions, in collaboration with law enforcement agencies, must have an ongoing which examines their relationship in order that at every point in time, the harmony sought by our democratic regime will be maintained. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have chosen today's theme to reflect on two main things. First, that as the leading communication university and journalism institution in Ghana, it is not lost on us the moral duty to provide a platform that brings the needed voices, perspectives, and expertise needed to shape this important discourse. That as the leading communication university and journalism training institution, and second, that we recognize that this moral duty extends as curriculum in the training and retraining of journalists and communication practitioners for today and the future. It is these and many other reasons for which our Directorate of Research, Innovation and Development have put together this program. It is our hope that this and many other fora will contribute to bringing out the best of ideas that helps address not only the manners of free speech, ethics and safety of journalists, but issues in many other facets of the communication space in Ghana. I will encourage all of us to pay attention and fully participate in the discourse this morning with the aim of taking away salient nuggets which helps us to shaping our practice in whichever area we find ourselves. Once again to this public forum, and to accept the responsibility of being chairman of this occasion. On behalf of the rector and the entire GIJ community, I would like to welcome you and I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our deputy rector a round of applause. So that's Professor Eric Opoku-Mensah. On that the chairman has welcomed all of us. I guess we are good to go. At the right time, we would recognize our distinguished invited personalities, but I just want to recognize our senior management from outside and within that we invited to come here. Thank you for making it. However, you know, at the beginning, I mentioned that we are live following us. We should please move forward. Well, there is no imagery, this broadcast. Yes, so imagery is important. So, respectfully, and everybody, please, I will crave your indulgence if you could kindly move forward. Okay, and I do think there are some empty spaces here too. Kindly. Giving your indulgence. Thank you for doing that. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We appreciate it. Further. There are a lot more of them. Yeah, a lot more spaces here. The reserved, okay. Thank you, Doc. Thank you so much. Yes, I think we are looking compact and tighter now. I have to also reserve a special commendation to our COP for very important reasons. Couldn't make it. We had to fall on our legal officer from Shraj, and it was at very short notice. Very, very short notice. To be honest, it was this morning. We are happy that you stepped in. We appreciate that. Okay, thanks everybody for moving. I think we can now have a very tight and nice program. All right. So we are ready to zoom into the main reason why we are here today. I don't have to bore anybody by standing here. I move straight away to the moderator for the day. He's somebody that we are all very familiar with. I'm sorry. Right. He's also an alumnus of this. Thank you for reminding me. Of this august institution. So Evans Mensah is an editor with multimedia. He is also the head of the political desk at JoyNews. And I'm sure a lot of you have been listening to him on news, within our news discourse and our news piece. Lots of experience in the media industry. He also hosts Connect on Fridays and PM Express on Joy TV. Very major staple on our talk show on our media landscape. So he is very well positioned to handle a discussion of this nature. Like I said, he's an alumnus of this prestigious institution, and we've had him every privilege for me to introduce our moderator for the day, Ms. Mensah.
Thank you very much, Doc. Echisekanku, I'm grateful. You were part of the fraternity until you decided to become a lecturer. But as they say, once a journalist, always a journalist. I'm grateful to be here. And it's a conversation that engaged our thoughts as practitioners and to the safety of journalists. Became very topical for a few reasons. Recently, myself, I've had to engage the subject on my shows, and we counted as a total of different cases that border on this, and it's just appropriate that. And so the 4 cases and all, just to set a context for the conversation before I even introduce. The 4 cases triggered this conversation and has engaged our thoughts over the last few weeks. The most prominent of which is the Oliver Barker-Vormawor case, which is still before a court of competent to navigate that landmine, how you talk about it without carrying the wrath of the court and possibly being in contempt. But that case is very interesting because it is not about what was said, but what was posted. And I think the medium through which the communication was made wasn't in mainstream. It was on social media that, if you read all the cases, the facts before the court as presented by the prof on his Facebook page, that the state believes is treasonous and so has charged him with treason felony. So that's where freedom of speech is now a subject of a treason felony prosecution. That is actually very interesting to study. I mean, within academic circles, indeed. Normally you have cases of defamation, libel, when you... Very, very interesting indeed. We wait to see how the case progresses. But that was the first major one. And then we have 3 other cases. 2 of them are actually very interesting because it borders on a law that many of us, I definitely didn't know much of until very recently, publication of false news, which in itself is very interesting indeed. And some have argued that the use of that particular regulation or law it's a way of smuggling in back the criminal libel law through an existing law that nobody has touched over the years. We'll discuss that. But two of those cases border on that, false publication of false news. I'm sure you've heard about the case of Oheneba Bono after he alleged in a Facebook video that the president had met 8 Supreme Court judges and influenced their decision in the 2020 election petition. And he's been charged with that. And then there's Mensa Thompson with ASEPA, published on Facebook, again, Facebook. So social media, is where a lot of these comments that have been made that are not currently subject of a prosecution were made. I think that that medium itself is very interesting. He published on Facebook a claim alleging that President Akufo-Addo's relatives used to use the president. The thing about this, and I'm just laying the context for the conversation, about his is that he recognized that what he had published was false, and he apologized. And it was after that that he was then arrested and charged with it. So that, again, is interesting. The fact that he attempted to mitigate because he realizes what he's done was wrong. He had published something. In the context of everything else, did it count for anything? And then, of course, we also have the case of his contempt of court. In this case, he was convicted and sentenced to 14 days, I think, in prison, and also to pay a fine of 3,000 cedis. Now, the interesting thing, coming back to the topic that had been chosen for the conversation, is that not all of these individuals, as you've noticed, are practitioners. Some of them are civil society players, some of them are activists, some of them are indeed practitioners. But of course, that's why the topic is broad enough. Examining freedom of expression, everybody is entitled to that. The ethics, and I guess there we are talking about ethics of our profession, and the threat to the safety of journalists. Perfect panel indeed. My former lecturer, who was one of my first lecturers here at GIJ when I enrolled more than 2 decades ago, Mr. George Sapon, is the Executive Secretary of the National Media Commission. A round of applause for Mr. George Sapon. And Mr. George Sapon, by the way, is a mentor. I credit him greatly for discovering, nurturing the talent that he's my personal foremost authority. Always exciting to listen to him and the way he approaches the conversation, and he's also a lawyer. And so thank you, George. I call him George, so you hear a lot of George in the conversation. I knew when he was at the University of Cape Coast, and he was a UTAC president. And as you know, UTAC can be very, very, very cantankerous. And so I engaged him quite often. And then I read recently that he is at GIJ doing very well as a deputy rector. So, ladies and gentlemen, your deputy rector of the Ghana Institute of Journalism, Professor Eric Opoku-Mensah. Okay. Also, Jay, Doc, thank you very much. And Doc has been such a pit. Doc, I invite you to take your seat as part of the panel. And as you know, we've had to make a slight change to the panel, and we are delighted that Nana Kweku Kumi, yes, legal officer with Shraj, who is also a former student here at GIJ, has agreed to join us. And please take your seat with the panel. As you know, we are live on JoyNews. Live stream also, if you're not watching us on television, on your digibox, or you can also watch us on DSTV channel 421. I will invite now Mr. George Sapon, who will lay out his initial thoughts on the subject, as I have sort of on the subject first, and then we'll hear from the other panelists, after which we'll sit for a brief conversation, but I'm looking forward to hearing the panelists also engage them. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. George Sapon.
Thank you very much, Evans. And my preliminary comments are in 3 parts. Number 1 is the excitement to be in this environment. And I want to say congratulations to Professor Pokumensa and his colleagues and all the people before them who succeeded in making this possible, I'm aware of, and we thank God. I'm really excited. I almost feel like coming back to teach. When you get the privilege to be introduced as the teacher of Evans Mensah, that is a big one. And I think it's a great honor that I get to say that. Between myself and Evans, it was more than that because he was like my kid brother. Who then was a reporter for World Press Review International, and Evans was my personal assistant in that project. Set up the Youth Network for Human Rights and Democracy. He was one of the most active guys that created UNET. And the group that set up the Young Leaders Program that produced some actors you know now, Bernard Mona and a couple of the people. Evans was a pioneer in that enterprise. So, and we taught in the very first batch. You were second or third? The second batch. Some of the most brilliant people I've met. I always said that I was teaching them only because I was older. Otherwise, they were far sharper than us. They've proven that. So, I'm grateful. But let me also quickly add why I find it so exciting that Lawyer Kumi is also sitting here. So look at Evans on this side and the Lawyer Kumi on the other side. Lawyer Kumi was my student at the A-level. I taught him A-level literature at the Konongo Dumasi Secondary School. Yes. Oh, yes, and also at GIJ, yes, Mascom. But what you don't know is that Dr. Kumi, Lawyer Kumi has 2 quick things. Even as a sixth former, he was called lawyer. He knew where he was going, even at that time. And that's a lot of focus. But he has a very interesting classmate, how far this journey is. Now, let me come, my 3rd point is about what brings us here. And I'm not going to say much other than to say, Evans has laid a very strong foundation for our discussion and given us a outline. What I want to say very controversially is that the only thing that links all these instances is the fact that each one of them has some kind of relationship with the police. Otherwise, they are very disparate issues. And within the context of free expression, it needs to be looked at very differently. The second position I want to submit, again following from what Evans, regarding on what platforms hold somebody accountable for offensive expression. And there's been a lot of confusion, and I think that the confusion is completely unwarranted. 2 things need to stand out in your mind. When you read the literature on the issues, it is usually about jurisdictional matters. If somebody sits in London and posts material, do you try this person? But that is completely different from whether the material is actionable or not. Please, I want you to understand this so that you can appreciate the literature when you encounter it. The question of whether or not the person has done something bad is completely different from where can you try the person. Do you see the point? Discuss these issues, confuse the 2 elements. What are the normative principles? Under what circumstances can you hold somebody responsible for offensive speech? In any case, what do you consider offensive speech and under what circumstances? Does the material stay offensive across time and space? And I pose that question because, as you all know, we have placed manner, and time limitations. Some expressions, it is not because the expression itself is the problem. It is because of the timing of it. Sometimes it is the timing, the place at which the expression is given. Sometimes it's not about the time, but the manner in which it is given. So we say time, place, and manner restrictions. So anytime you look at any situation, think in your mind exactly what is an issue here. Are we activating a particular piece of legislation on the basis of the timing of the material, on the basis of the manner of the communication, or on the basis of the place of the communication? You need to be able to deal with these matters in your mind before you can address any of these complicated matters. Let me jump a bit because we don't have time. In Ghana here, there are two critical provisions that you need to look at when you are discussing matters of free expression and media freedom. The first one is Article 21. And let's share together what that article. Please listen to this very carefully. Article 21, 1A. It says, all persons shall have right A, freedom of speech and expression, which shall include freedom of the press and other media. Please, anytime you read any piece of legal writing, keep in mind what lawyers say, that the lawmaker does not use words in vain. So this one says freedom of speech, and then it adds and expression. In other words, speech is different from expression. Okay? I can see from the students' faces that if you thought that expression was added to clarify the point of speech and they are the same, you want to reflect a bit more on that. Okay? And then it goes on to say, which shall include freedom of the press. And then it still adds, and other media. When you read the law, please pause over any of these elements. We don't have too much time to explain what these things mean, but for purposes of your study, we want to point out, run over them like that. Here, then we jump to 162. And 162 says, freedom and independence of the media are hereby guaranteed. Let me check with you. Do you immediately spot any major difference? Who can just hazard something for us? What is the most substantive difference you see between the two provisions? Okay, let's not worry. In the first instance, it says you have the right to. In the second instance, it says it is hereby guaranteed. You understand? The point I'm seeking to make to you is that when you read the law, don't take the words for granted. Okay? We are not going to have too much time to waste on some of these issues. But again, here, in the first instance, it says you will have the right to freedom of speech, which shall include freedom of speech and of expression. And then he now adds the press and still adds the media. Okay? Here, he gives you another word which appears for the first time here. What is that word? Oh, you heard it, you know. In addition to freedom, it now adds independence. And I want you to keep in mind, again, that the lawmaker does not use words in vain. So, as students and as people interested in this topic, we need to keep our eyes on these issues. Again, I'm not going to waste too much of your time on these issues. The next most important provision I want you to take note of is the one that we always forget. If you read the Constitution, what the provision that I'm reading to you now is 162. Then 163 is the provision that says, all state-owned media shall afford fair opportunities and facilities for the presentation of divergent views and dissenting opinions. I would want to come back briefly to this. Maybe let me just quickly say it because it's... We have heard discussions around LGBTQI issues. And one of the key provisions in the law that they want to deal with is that people cannot use for causes in relation to that. The fact that under this provision, there's an obligation on the state-owned media to give fair opportunities and facilities for the presentation and dissenting opinions. So to the extent that advocates of that law or those who are opposed to that law have dissenting opinions, the state-owned media will at all times have an obligation to give voice to those people, which by this provision may well have constitutional protection to do what they do. And so if you participate in that debate, I want you to keep in mind because it's an upcoming issue. But let me just quickly end on that and come to 164 and listen to what it says. The provisions of Articles 162 and 163 of this Constitution, which is the ones guaranteeing media freedom, carefully, are subject to laws that are reasonably required in the interest of national security, public order, public morality, and for the purpose of protecting the reputations, rights, and freedoms of other persons. A lot of words. Let's read it again, and I want you to count for me. How many elements the law sets down as the substantive limitations on media freedom? To laws that are reasonably required in the interest of national security, public order, public morality, and for the purpose of protecting the reputations, rights, and freedoms of other persons. How many things are set down here as the limitations to the right to press freedom? This one is not exams. This one is not complicated. Let me share a joke with you. When I was in high school, my agric science teacher said he was come to class the following week with Calossobruchus. And knowing that this was a fearful animal, people decided to stay guard. The guy comes to teach and he dips his hand into his pocket and brings out a matchbox. The Calossobruchus was just the maize weevil. Small thing, big name. I learned from that day that there are a lot of things that look big in name, but are usually very small things. So I just want to invite you to join me. Let's go through it again. If you read this provision very carefully, I'm going to give you a couple of things. The number one is national security. Okay? Number two is public order. Number three is public morality. The fourth element is the protection of the reputations of other persons. And then the last is the rights and freedoms of other people. Do you understand? So let's go through it again. Laws that are reasonably required. So to be able to say something constitutes a limitation on media freedom, first of all, you must be able to show that there's a law on that matter, and two, that law is reasonably required. Security, public order, public morality, protection of the reputations of others, and the rights of other people. So anytime you want analysis over whether somebody's encounter with the police constitutes an infringement on that person's right to free expression, the first thing you want to do is to come to this provision and to check the matter that you are dealing with against these rules. I hope you get the point I'm making. So if there is a law on national security under which the person is being dealt with, you want to be extremely cautious in your analysis in terms of whether the matter is an abridgment or disproportionate abridgment or unlawful abridgment or abuse of media freedom. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you want to be able to check very carefully if the law under which this matter is happening is covered under any of these elements. I hope you get the point I'm making. And that is why when I listen to this conflating too many things, the last thing that I want to say here is about, Evans gives us a very good idea of the elements. You listen to the elements that the Constitution sets down under Article 164 as constituting the substantive limitations on media freedom. Can we list them? Would a volunteer give me one? Yes? Are we ready together? Why can you do that to me? Yes? Thank you very much, Hajia. What again? Public order of individuals. Rights and freedoms. Okay? Now, does this substantive limitation speak of contempt of court? Does it? So I want to leave that question to you. The Constitution certainly provides for protection. It is one of the most important tools for protecting the integrity of the court in any jurisdiction. But it appears to me that when the writers of the Constitution set down in strict terms the elements that should constitute permissible abridgment on the right to free expression, they deliberately excluded that. And so as we carry on, I want us to examine in greater detail. I want to round up by saying I've said a number of things. Number one is that analyzing questions about right to free expression can be technically, philosophically, and legally complicated. And that anybody who wants to engage in that requires the patience and modesty to understand how it works. Two, that anytime you are, please think of it in terms of limitation. Is it a manner limitation? Okay? If you are able to identify these elements, please come under Article 164 to see whether the particular piece of legislation that you are dealing with falls within the list that the Constitution itself has provided. I want to end here and hope that if there is opportunity to engage more, I'll return to this. Thank you very much. Forgive me if it's been technical.
Thank you very much, George. A big round of applause for him again. Just emerged as he talks about the limitations, public order, security, but then you look at the very recent high-profile case of treason felony, and the state argument is that it is one that would definitely affect, according to the prosecution, public order, national security. And so, yes, although it is an expression, an exercise of an individual's, what an individual believes to be his right to free expression, so far as the state believes that expression may violate public order and security. And I would now go on to invite our second discussant to give us his own thoughts on the back of what we've just heard there. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Dr. Ebo Afo, Head Department of Communication Studies.
Good morning. Since media freedom constitutes a very significant element when it comes to freedom of expression. The question has always been, what is media freedom? Okay, it's okay. So what is media freedom? Try as much as possible to make it so easy. It reflects the degree of freedom that a journalist and media institutions enjoy in a society. And the effort made by authorities of state to respect and ensure respect for this freedom. And this is where I want us to take a critical look at. That is, and ensure respect for this freedom. And it means that, for example, publication or broadcast of an error must be protected by publication of the truth. And this is also important. And journalists' attack on government officials, other than abuse of security of the state and treason, must not be punished. This is also critical when you are looking at media freedom. There are two most important pillars of press freedom. And these are the media practitioners and two authorities of state. Now the question is, to the current state of press freedom in this country, and according to Media Foundation for West Africa, our media practitioners have been reckless. Reckless in the sense that they have thrown to the dogs. They refuse to verify information that they receive from sources. And they tell outright lies. So and according to the same Media Foundation, between 2020 and 2021, as many as 1,754 cases of ethical violations were recorded from 10 radio stations. And if this be the case, then one can only conclude that our media practitioners are contributing to weakening the press freedom of this country. Now let us also look at the authorities of state. When they believe they have been defamed, instead of going to the National Media Commission for redress, or the security agencies of this country to pick up the alleged offenders, molest them, harass them, intimidate them, persecute them, and even prosecute them. There are stories that some of these suspected offenders have been beaten. So from this, one can conclude that the attitude of our authorities of state does not show respect and ensure respect. This analysis, one can therefore be tempted to conclude that the two most significant pillars of press freedom have joined hands in endangering our press freedom. And this should awaken the conscience of citizens. Because they are hard-won press freedom. And by extension, they are democracy. Because the 1992 Constitution is helpless without press freedom. And with your permission, I would want to make two suggestions which I believe can help strengthen our press freedom. And one, the National Communications Authority should not issue license for the establishment of television and radio stations. Because it is supposed to be an arm of the executive, ones of TV and radio license. So what should we do? That their responsibility should be given to the National Media Commission. And what this means is that the National Media Commission should always be made up of members who have the commitment to ensure high standard of media practice in this country. And now my second suggestion is that media, democracy, and development should be a subject that should be taught at the SHS. Hopefully, Ghana will begin to have a new generation that really understand and appreciate the role and contribution of the media, so that we can have citizens who are ready to protect our press freedom. And like I've said, our 1992 Constitution is helpless without press freedom. So this would be my initial.
Thank you very much. Comments and observations there from Dr. Afol. We'll get to discuss a bit more of everything else and synthesize it, and we can invite you to join us in the conversation. And I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this as well. I want to now invite Lawyer Kumi to also share his own independent thoughts on this very important subject, re-examining freedom of expression, ethics, and threats to the safety of journalists. A round of applause to Lawyer Kumi.
Thank you very much, my brother Evans. I really hope my thoughts will be done are there. And they assigned me to be here, so I hope my thoughts are that independent, but I doubt they are. Thank you, Evans. It's really exciting to be here this morning after 22 years of living this institute. It's the same institute, even though it's new premises. It's like an old wine in a new casket. Is that the saying? Right. And it's as intimidating and as exciting to be sharing a platform with two of your great teachers. Mr. Ibuafo taught me many years ago at GIJ. He taught me print journalism. We used to call him Uncle Ibu. And now I can see one of my great teachers at GIJ as well. He's here, Mr. Matthew Makwame. Am I right? Yes, Mr. Makwame is here. I just spotted him in the crowd. And Mr. Josapon has said it already. That's what Mr. Josapon, he has taught, he has known me for many years. In fact, looking at the faces of some of the students. I beg you, not the lecturers. I see if I say how long he has known me, you might be intimidated to think this guy is an old man, but he's not. In fact, he had just finished the university and he came to teach us literature in English. We were 10 in all, but he was very fond of two of us. A friend of mine called Omar. He's now a lecturer, English, in one of the universities. And he wanted us to take up communicating or law. Fortunately for him, I took up both, and Omar did English and communication. So we did not disappoint our lecturer, Mr. Joseph. And once again, he taught me at GIJ as well. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, I'm very excited. And HS Ikanku, we were at Legon together. I was happy to be in the same room with, been friends with Bernard Avler for years, starting back from Presec. So he used to come there. So I got to know HS Ikanku. Now Dr. HS, I'm sorry, Dr. HS Ikanku. So he's also been a friend for a very long time. Evans, we used to be in the same line of duty until he left for London and parted ways. So I'm happy to have met a lot of old friends here. I hope to make some new friends before I leave here today. Said earlier, I do not have the gravitas as my friends who spoke before me. They are big men. So let me grow gradually and get there. Then I can independently. But for now, my thoughts are not so independent, even though I don't think they are a deviation from the subject matter under discussion. Mine is a speech sort of, so I'm going to deliver it. Freedom of expression, and by extension, writing in support of free speech in 1644, the English philosopher and poet John Milton stated, "And though all the winds of doctrine were let loose to play upon the earth, so truth be in the field, we do injuriously by licensing and prohibiting to misdoubt her strength. Let her and falsehood grapple. Whoever knew truth put to the West in a free and open encounter." In a speech for liberty, that to him, censorship was the greatest discouragement and an affront that can be offered to learning and to learned men. Milton wrote, "Human nature being what it is, there is simply no point in trying to stop the free flow of ideas and information through suppression of the press by whatever means. Evil manners," he said, "are perfectly learned without books 1,000 other ways which cannot be stopped." And to add to the argument, the French philosopher and writer Voltaire, I agree with you on what you have to say, but I would defend to the death your right to say it. The third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, said, "Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost." He is even quoted as saying that were he given the government without a press and the press without a government, he would not hesitate to choose a press without a government over a government without a press. Benjamin Franklin, on the other hand, puts it this way: "Freedom of speech is a pillar of a free government. When this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved." Or his concept of the struggle between truth and falsehood and truth's ultimate triumph, former U.S. Supreme Court Judge Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes shifts the metaphor from the battlefield to the marketplace as he writes, "When men have realized that time has upset many fighting fates, and they may come to believe even more that they believe the very foundations of their own conduct, that the ultimate good desired is better reached by the free trade in ideas, that the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market, and that truth is the only ground upon which their wishes safely can be carried out." Oliver Wendell Holmes's contemporary and fellow Supreme Court Judge, Justice Louis Brandeis, once wrote in his famous defense of free speech, "Those," he said, "and in his government, the deliberative forces should prevail over the arbitrary. They knew that it is hazardous to discourage thought, hope, and imagination. That fear breeds repression. That repression breeds hate. That hate menaces stable governments. that the path of safety lies in the opportunity to discuss freely supposed grievances and propose remedies, and that the fitting remedy for evil counsel is good ones. The case for freedom of expression and press does not end with individual thoughts and writings. All over the world, it cannot be denied that this freedom is among the most promoted, most cherished, the most advocated, and the most upheld fundamental rights in all democracies. Several statutes, conventions, laws, and national constitutions boldly and clearly declare the importance of freedom of expression and its corollary, freedom of the press. The United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, in Article 19 states, and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Article 10 of the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedom, 1950, provides everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. This article shall not prevent states from requiring the licenses of broadcasting, television, or cinema enterprises. 2. The exercise of these freedoms, since it carries with it duties and responsibilities, may be subject to such formalities, conditions, restrictions, or penalties as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society. In the interest of national security, territorial integration or rights of others, for preventing the disclosure of information received in confidence, and for maintaining the authority of the states. Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, 1966, coincidentally, it also happens to be Article 19 here, says, everyone shall have the right to hold opinions without interference. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression. And this right shall include freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, either orally, in writing or in print, in the form of art, through any other media of his choice. The exercise of the rights provided for in paragraph 2 of this article carries with it special duties and responsibilities. It may therefore be for respect of the rights or reputations of others, and 2, for the protection of national security or of public order or of public health or morals. Article 9 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, 1981, states, every individual shall have the right to receive information. Every individual shall have the right to express and disseminate his opinions within the law. In Ghana, freedom of expression is a guaranteed right conferred on all under the 1992 Constitution, as stated by Mr. Josapo and Dr. Eboafo already. Article 21, 1A of the Constitution says, all persons shall have the right to a freedom of speech and expression, which shall include freedom of the press and the media. Mr. Sapon has said it. I think it is stated ad nauseum, so there's no need for me to go over that. But what is freedom of expression? The phrase freedom of speech is so common that its definition or meaning is mostly taken for granted. Many statutes and international documents may have mentioned the subject without necessarily defining or addressing it. Refreshingly, however, the Commonwealth Secretariat issued a statement on freedom of expression issued in June 1998. It defined the terms this way. Freedom of expression is a primary freedom, an essential precondition to the exercise of other freedoms. It is a foundation upon which other rights and freedoms arise. The statement identifies certain principles forming a basis for the recognition of freedom of expression in a democratic legal system. These are the existence of constitutional protection of freedom of expression and the availability of pluralism in the ownership of the mass media of communication. The Commonwealth Secretariat statement pointed out that some sections of the mass media, such as electronic media, should operate under a licensing regime. State licensing of broadcasters is the norm in the world today. I'm quoting them. The licensing body should be autonomous and independent of direct government control. Licenses, as Mr. Dr. Ebo stated earlier, licenses must be awarded, denied, cancelled, or suspended according to established and published criteria. The process of licensing body must be open, and licensing a body must be open and non-discriminatory. It is legitimate for a state to establish licensing criteria that deny broadcasting to non-citizens. That's an argument for another day. Finally, the Commonwealth Statement advocates that the law should provide for a right or reply for opposing ideas and the ventilation of divergent views on issues, especially issues of controversy. Just want to take Justice Francois, I'm just stating a Supreme Court. Justice Francois, one of our brilliant Supreme Court judges of blessed memory, he stated in his inimitable English language, he puts it this way: the free exchange of views is necessary to give the electorate an opportunity to assess the performance of the government in power as against the potential of an opposition in the wilderness. It keeps a government on its toes and gives a neutral, apolitical citizen an opportunity to make up his mind, either to consign the disenchanted noises he hears around to mere rabid ranting that proceeds from electoral defeat, or give it the evocative distinction of demonstrating the quality that unfortunately makes the vote through bad electoral judgment. He stated, a denial of opportunity for the expression of opposing views inherent in the democracy will amount to moves which may culminate in the creation of a monolithic one, which is one step removed from one-party government. That is a dictatorship. I'm citing one. In the case of the Republic and Independent Media Corporation of Ghana, popularly known as the Radio Eye case, the issue of free press came before the Supreme Court for determination that the right to establish a media free from government control in light of an Article 1621 and 3 of the Constitution. 1621, freedom and independence of the media are hereby guaranteed. 3, there shall be no impediment to the establishment of private press or media, and in particular, there shall be requiring any person to obtain a license as a prerequisite to the establishment or operation of a newspaper, journal, or other communication. In the Radio Eye case, the accused persons took steps to establish a private radio station without the consent of the Ghana Frequency Registration and Control Board as established under the law. The accused were arraigned before a circuit court and on a charge of unauthorized use of radio frequency in contravention of Section 15 of the SMCD 71. In another case, to New Patriotic Party and GBC, I think we all know that case, or we are familiar with it, when the New Patriotic Party, then in opposition, sued the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, a state-owned media, for not giving it the opportunity to air its views on the budget of 1993. Ladies and gentlemen, before I bring my speech to an end, I would like us to, since your topic for today captures the issue of ethics, I would like us to go over just the preamble of the Ghana Journalists Association, the Code of Ethics of the Ghanaian Journalists Association. The preamble of it is what I'm referring to. 1, the GIJ Code of Ethics has been drawn up as a ready reference guide and is applicable to members in the state-owned media, the private media, and local freelance journalists. 2, the code provides a frame of reference to the National Executive and the Disciplinary Committee and members of the association when it comes necessary to initiate disciplinary action against members who flout any article of the code. 3, the code is meant to ensure that members adhere to high journalistic standards, professional competence, and good behavior in carrying out their duties. As a fourth estate of the realm, the public expects the media to play their watchdog role. They should do this with a high sense of responsibility without infringing on the right of individuals and society in general. Ladies and gentlemen, I just read the preamble. The articles are there, they are 17. But my question is, I wonder how many journalists today, or media practitioners in general, are even familiar or even aware of the fact that there is a code of conduct for journalists in Ghana. Is it a case that everybody finishes school, as he's awaiting results, he finds a radio station owned by his uncle, decides to be on air, and then spew out whatever he feels should go out? Is it the case that because I have a flair for writing, I studied English at the University of Ghana, and so I can write, and so Kofi employs me to be a writer, and I pass through the mill without necessarily going through some rudimentary training just to be very conversant with the rules of the game? Journalism is a serious profession, so may we take it seriously. I'm very grateful to you all.
Thank you very much, lawyer. Please, a big round of applause for him for me. So we're going to invite you to join us as we expand this conversation. We don't have too many minutes to spare, but let's get into it. So I think there is consensus that yes, there is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, but there are limitations. And I think George, Lawyer Kumi, I've all explained to you what the limitations are. I think the question that remains for me is, so if there are limitations, what happens when the rights are the right to freedom of expression and speech? What happens when there's an abuse? All right. How do you sanction that abuse without creating a sense or an impression or a reality that, as some have held the view recently, that freedom of speech is under attack? And I guess that's the question I'm going to put to my panelists first, before I bring my audiences in. What we've seen recently, and I laid out 4 cases. 2 of the cases, the state or the police have decided to use publication of false news as a means of sanctioning what is perceived to be the abuse. The courts themselves have also imposed a prison term, 14 days. And then there is also treason felony. So let's have the conversation broadly about, so how do you sanction the abuse? And I want to ask that question put in the context of our desire as a state in the past to abolish the criminal libel law, because then there was a view that we should not criminalize speech. George, how do you draw the balance? That was an admission then, that no matter what the person says, don't criminalize it. So we abolished it. So, but when, as we've said, as Dr. Afol just painted, there's a documentation that journalists are abusing the rights, violations of ethics. So when that happens, what do you do?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think that I, as a field academic, as I ran from the classroom, I'm still not sure whether the rules on academic freedom apply to me. But when you have young students before you, you are forced to balance your adult reflection on reality against truth, and which must predominate in a discussion like this. On this occasion, I choose truth, knowing the discomfort that it creates. The reality of all these pieces of legislation, and I want our younger colleagues to listen very carefully, none of these provisions is a media or speech-related provision. Okay. So if you read that particular provision, do you have the Criminal Offences Act? Don't.
Which one? Is it publication of false news?
Yes.
Okay, should I read it?
Read it out and let us take our time to help.
Okay. So this is 208 of the Criminal Offences Act, publication of false news.
Before you read, remember what I tried to do with you. That when you are dealing with the law, please don't jump over words. Okay? Think around it in terms of what are the elements here, because the lawmaker takes time in selecting the words. So please let us listen to the provision.
A person who publishes or reproduces a statement, rumor, or report which is likely to cause fear and alarm to the public or to disturb the public peace, knowing or having reason to believe that the statement, rumor, or report is false, commits a misdemeanor.
Okay. So what are the elements that the law is talking about? One, that you have published. And at law, publication just simply means making the material available to a third party. So if you make information available to somebody, that has the likelihood that if the information is false and has the likelihood to create, what does it say?
To reason to be, okay, alarm, cause fear and alarm to the public, or to disturb the public peace.
Okay. Fear, alarm, disturbance of public peace, falsity. These are the elements. I want to submit to you that this has nothing to do with journalism. Lawyer Kumi just cited to you a brilliant judge, Oliver Wendell Holmes. Wendell Holmes sets the context for these kinds of things. That in his view, speech is punishable when it presents clear and present danger. Okay? Lawyer Kumi, repeat it with them. Clear and present danger. In order not to confuse anybody, he gives us an analogy to illustrate the point. Now, for example, if we were in a theater, we are in a hall like this. If somebody shouted fire, and all of us sought to run out, and people died, and the person who shouted that fire knew that it was not true, then that person ought to be held responsible. You understand? So these provisions are public order rules for the safety of society. So they are not media-related laws.
Okay, but George, if you don't mind, there's a complication there that I would like to throw to Dr. Afo. I'll come back to you, but I'm sure you have a thought on this. But Dr. Afo, just on the back of what George has said. However, the same law then goes on to say, and this is, George says it's not about journalism. That's true. Because we are in the journalism institute, let me bring in the journalism bit here. The law says it is not a defense to a charge under subsection 1, which I just read to George, that the person charged did not know or did not have reason to believe that the statement, rumor, or report was false. Now, I asked a journalism question. There's no journalist in this world who can tell me that in all his lifetime had not published news that eventually turns out to be false. I have. And that is why the remedy is to, have a rejoinder. But the law says the fact that it is, you don't know at the time that you are publishing is not a defense, right? So what's your comment on the back of what George had said? Very, very brief. I'll come back to George and I'll also have your thoughts on that same point. Well, what's your comment on this?
You see, one fundamental principle of journalism is to be truthful. And two, to be truthful also means that then there's the need for the journalist to verify every information that he or she receives from sources of information. So if journalists will apply all the principles of journalism and also the ethics of journalism, I'm sure it would go a very long way to minimize issues when it comes to truthfulness. See? And then two, as a society, knowing the significance of media, news media, and journalism, I think we should take a second look at the laws and then evaluate the laws and see if there's the need for us to do away with some of the laws that at the end of the day do not help the journalist in executing his or her roles.
So, Lawyer, coming to that question then, should we repeal this law? You can give this. In federal of freedom of speech, expression, etc., should we repeal it?
You've put me on the spot.
I know. George, prepare, because I'm asking you the same question.
As I said earlier, my speech will be very measured. As I told you, I don't have the gravitas of my two bosses here. Anyway, but I think that's not, it isn't within my powers to so suggest. If those who use the law, I mean, all of us use the law, if Parliament, if NGOs, if those who agitate for change of law feel, and journalists, for that matter, feel that there's a need for the law to be changed, they should advocate for that. It could be changed. They could challenge laws in our court, and they could be changed. But in line with what Dr. Afo said, I'm stating something. He says, people's right to true information as part of the Code of Ethics of the Ghana Journalists Association. He said, one, the duty of every journalist is to write and report the truth, bearing in mind his or her duty to serve the public. Two, the public have the right to unbiased, accurate, balanced, and comprehensive information, as well as to express themselves freely through the media. And three, finally, a journalist should make adequate inquiries and cross-check his or her facts. Check, cross-check, and re-check. Okay. I believe so.
Back to George then. I want to complete section 2 of 208 before I ask George the question. I think it probably might. Although the law says it is not a defense to a charge under section 1 that a person charged did not know or did not have reason to believe that a statement or rumor or report was false, unless, it creates an exception, unless it is proved that prior to the publication, that person took reasonable measures to verify the accuracy of the statement, rumor, or report. George, do we still need this law?
So, again, deal with the very technical lines. Understanding free expression and legality is like a tightrope walk. Okay? You miss a step, you are down. And that is why the technical rules are so important. I was building towards a certain analysis. You pose this question upon a certain presumption. That presumption is that this is a media-related law. Okay, and it encompasses the work of a journalist. The proposition I'm making to you is that this has nothing to do with journalism. Okay, and I've given you the scenario under which these laws apply. These are expressions that relate to clear and present danger situations. The reason why this has become necessary are two. Number one is that it is the Supreme Court that pointed to its application as a reasonable law that can be used in journalistic situations. I disagree with the court on that. But that is why I began by saying the context, I do not want to create discomfort, but in reality, I do not think that this law has anything to do with journalism. And to the extent that we understand it's not a journalistic law, and we still need to protect society within the context of the analysis that I've given you, I will preserve it. The only reason why we are where we are is because there is a lack of comprehensive framework for regulating media. And so in the frustration of people of power, they rush, you understand. So look at it this way. I always use the metaphor of scaffolding the stage. And we do that a lot in Ghana. We are on this stage. If the lighting here is poor and people can't see us, what would Ghanaians do? Everybody will begin to leave their seat and walk closer to the stage so they can see us and hear us. Over time, people would be standing on chairs, those who couldn't come in early. Over another period, you'll be seeking people building scaffolds in order to see. When all that we needed was to switch on the lights on stage, then everybody could sit at their stage. You understand? So proposals relating to repeal of the legislation and things like that only scaffold the stage, because the people don't seem to take their time to understand what the problem is. The reality of the problem is that we lack comprehensive regulatory framework. And because of that lack, anytime society comes under stress, we are rushing to find solutions to the problem. The solution is not wasting our time over the repeal of such a provision. Evans, I don't know how many of us will recall that almost a decade ago, there was a big rumor in town about an impending earthquake. People woke up in the night and ran out of their rooms, you understand? Do you suggest that if the person who started that rumor was found, that person shouldn't be punished? Do you understand? And if you repeal the legislation like this, under what legislation will you be dealing with that person? We just had COVID. And we saw all the misinformation that went through COVID. Some of them particularly dangerous for the lives of people. You understand? Every democratic state requires those kinds of legislations to address those kinds of situations. That is what these laws are for. The danger in our context is that because we are misapplying the laws in relation to free speech and expression in connection with media, they have become points of discussion. If we understood that these are not media-related laws, and that the context of our difficulty is that we don't have the laws that will enable us address offensive expression within media, then what we need to do is to look for solutions that address that specific problem. You understand? Switch on the light instead of scaffolding the stage. That is my view.
Let me bring in my audience. Do you have microphones in the audience? If we do, let the microphones go around so we can. If you have a question or a comment, let me see. Let me give a microphone. Show your hands or bring your microphone, and then you can ask your question. Please, strictly 60 seconds comment. If it's a comment, 60 seconds. If it's a question, 30 seconds, because we don't have too much time to wrap up. So yes, a question is strictly 30 seconds. Just one question. A comment is 60 seconds. That's a minute. Let me see by hands. Let me see by hands. Okay, please. And then first, let's Mr. Makwame.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. In your opening remarks, you raised the issue of the contempt of court. George also just brushed over it. I think for me, that's where we have a problem. A journalist can be reporting on somebody who is purporting to be a criminal. And that criminal will walk free, but that journalist will go to jail because of contempt of court. And if you read Professor Anita Mensah-Bonsu, sorry, accident was not Justice Anita Mensah-Bonsu. Yeah, Justice Professor Anita Mensah-Bonsu. When he was looking at the Section 10 of the Criminal and Offences Act, he said that is reserved to the court. For me, anytime you mention a court, I say it's reserved to the judge. And further went to explain that it's also captured in the 1992 Constitution. You see, and before apology, if you go to Article 1912, you realize that that's 1912, where the judge has the power, where that crime is not defined, and the punishment also is not prescribed, but it's the judge that determines what it should be. And so you talk about 1905 and 1911, then you realize that it make, excuse me to say, it make nonsense of 1905 and 1911. How do we handle this so that our journalists will not be jailed? If you remember the issue of...
unfortunately, because of time.
Let me just conclude on that.
Yes, but that's like
because
20
somebody went to jail.
20 seconds.
Yeah, 20
if
seconds.
You can do that.
Professor Bene, who was thought to have been dealing with drugs, a diplomat in public service. The editor who was reporting on that matter, Ghanaian political editor, went to jail for 1 month of contempt of court, but that purported criminal walked free.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, and that begs the question, is it acceptable under any circumstance for somebody to be imprisoned for a perceived violation of freedom of speech, rights, or abuse of the right? Should that be even a subject of contemplation? Is it acceptable to have somebody go to jail because he said something that was offensive to a court, to an individual, to the state? I wonder what the thoughts are. Should freedom of speech violations or abuse ever land a person in jail? Let's think about that whilst we get more views from there. Yes, your name, please.
Martin Sector, at UPSA, and an adjunct lecturer here too. I am not a legal person like others, but I want to think that it's important for us to look at how other disciplines can inform this kind of discourse. From the language perspective, if you talk about some of the things that we are concerned about, one of the things being that someone says something and there's a problem. We can learn from some of the things that we have in linguistics. For instance, talk about speech acts and what we call felicity. Some of the problems that have led to people being hauled before the law include certain statements, and yet we haven't seen evidence of that person's ability to perform the acts. So very often, we must also be mindful about whether people who claim to